Please welcome to the stage Erika James, Dean, the Wharton School, University of Pennsylvania, Catherine Malkova, SVP, Kyndryl Consult and Practices, U.S. Kyndryl, and interviewer Manit Ahuja, Editor-at-Large, Forbes.
Good afternoon, everyone. What an amazing day of conversations. So now we're going to be talking about disruption. Disruption is what drives business forward. It's at the intersection of human ingenuity and artificial intelligence lies one of the defining challenges of our time. How do we lead organizations that can adapt faster than change itself? I'm thrilled to be here in conversation now with Dean Erika James, Wharton's visionary leader and expert in crisis management, and Catherine Malkova, Kyndryl's Senior Vice President of Consult and Practices for the U.S., to help us decode the art of leadership that scales in times of change. Thank you both for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we're living in an era where yesterday's strategies may become tomorrow's limitations, and where organizations that survive will be those bold enough to reinvent before they have to. This era of technological change, economic uncertainty, and cultural shifts, what does readiness mean to the both of you? Dean James?
Readiness to me means being prepared at any moment to react, respond, while also simultaneously remembering that you are leading an organization, you're leading a team, you're leading a department. So the ability to flex between being reactionary and also strategic.
Catherine?
Yeah, and I'll take a little bit of a technology view at this. We've been studying the top CXOs recently on their take on readiness. And what we observe is this readiness paradox. 90% of leaders are saying that their technology is best in class, yet only 39% think that it's ready for future risks. And similarly, 90% invest in modernization, and they call it their top priority. But we know that 44% of infrastructure of today is nearing the end of life. And so with that, readiness to me, one is it's a continuous process. It's understanding that it never ends. Two, it involves everyone within the organization. It's not a one department's responsibility. It's business, it's IT, it's HR, it's finance. And then at the end of the day, to be ready for tomorrow, you have to think about not only technology, but people as well. People is the most important part of that readiness for the future.
And so, Dean James, you also sit on various boards, including Morgan Stanley. And so how are you advising the companies and the boards that you sit on in order how to get their organizations ready?
So it's similar to what Catherine was just saying. There are multiple areas of focus that can draw our attention. And we no longer have the luxury of saying, I'm going to spend all of my attention on this one issue. That's also the reason why it's so important to have a strong team of people and strong leadership across the organization, because you're going to need to rely on the strengths that different individuals or different departments or units will have. And sometimes those strengths will be necessary for a particular issue that's being addressed. Other times it's a strength that some other individual or leader will have that will be necessary. And your responsibility is to be able to navigate and manage when you need to deploy particular assets within whatever it is that you're managing.
And Catherine, you were nodding to that. Do you have anything to add?
No, I fully agree. I think it's the combination of cross-functional expertise of everyone coming together and that readiness momentum that's going to define the future.
So Catherine, at Kyndryl, you focus on transportation across AI, cloud, and cybersecurity, which is pretty vast. How do you develop these structural and strategic capabilities for organizations to remain resilient?
Yes, and I kind of want to take a step back and define what does resilient organization even mean? Because there's one thing is to be ready to absorb the shocks. But the resilient organization is the one that can turn those shocks into opportunities. And also knowing that change is constant. There is no shelf life on change. Tomorrow, there's going to be more technological advancement. There's going to be more disruption. The pace is accelerating every day. And so when leaders are facing the paradox of being ready for tomorrow, it's also balancing out what they need to do today to run their business and how to prepare for the future. And so it's almost like going to the gym. You cannot say that I worked out and now I'm good and I had enough. It's having the muscle of constantly reinventing themselves and understanding that it's an ever-moving target. Right? There's new technology that's going to come out tomorrow, and when leaders are saying that innovation is their top priority and modernization is their top priority, it's a moving target. So what we see with organizations that are truly resilient are those that have clarity around what their mission and vision is, invest in their talent, and understand that it's the muscle that will take them forward that will always continue moving.
If I could just build on that
Please.
muscle metaphor for just a moment. One of the things that I think we need to be mindful of is resilient. We talk about that. I think it's almost an overused term right now. And to Catherine's point, this notion of always being ready, I think about that now as one of the leadership traits is being stamina. And it's not only physical stamina to withstand the constant nature of change, but it's the mental stamina, it's the emotional stamina, it's the stamina to continuously redefine relationships with suppliers, with people within your own organization, with customers, et cetera. The stamina that's required now of leaders, I think, is precisely what's going to allow people to move from issue to issue to issue.
That's such a good point. You talked about stamina, and that's a key factor in resilient leadership. And so in this climate defined by speed and uncertainty, what practical steps would you advise organizations to take to shift from being reactive to building truly resilient pipelines and teams?
So one of the things that we get asked a lot in higher education, particularly business schools, are what are the technical skills that people need? And I know that that's an area that's near and dear to your heart. And the thing to keep in mind is that the technology is constantly changing. And so we can prepare you this year for the technology that exists today, but next year it's going to be a very different set of skills to learn a new form of technology. So the ability to be agile and be in constant learning mode is one facet, particularly for the technical skills. But I would say the most important skills that we're trying to advance to build the leadership pipeline is reminding people and getting people comfortable with the fact that the softer skills are actually the hardest things that you'll do. There's no answer in the back of the book for how to manage conflict, right? Every individual is different and you've got to relearn. So the more you're focused on building relationship skills, listening, having empathy, navigating through difficult conversations, those are the skills that I think will sustain leadership going into the future.
I found that so inspiring too when we were having our conversation last week, because you think about, where you are in the workforce, the changes that are disrupting your industry, there are changes that are disrupting the global economy at unprecedented levels, and there's so much uncertainty. It almost feels overwhelming when you don't know where to begin, how you can acquire technical skills when it's still evolving. And then just understanding that leaning back, that flexibility, malleability, and that cooperation, being a team member that your colleagues want to work with and learn with and grow with, is actually an underrated trait in this environment.
And I would say I can't agree with Dean James more about skills as we define them. There's some interesting data points for the audience. 44% of jobs and technical skills will be obsolete within the next 10 years. And so with that in mind, we also know that there are new jobs that are coming out. So I don't know if you knew, but the graduates of today may have 7 careers, and some of them don't even exist yet. So when you come out, the most important skills are the ability to learn, that continuous learning, and the notion of being always seeking for new information, and the soft skills as it relates to analytical thinking, as it relates to relationship building. That's what will serve people the best, going forward.
Right, and that's not necessarily something new. That's something that we all have practiced and learned throughout our careers, whatever stage we're in. And so, Catherine, from your work across global teams, what have you learned about building leadership structures that handle both uncertainty and scale?
Yes, that's a great question, because if you think about the traditional management book leadership structures, they're prepared for world that's pretty stable, and those structures tend to break under pressure. And it really comes down to 3 things that organizations that are leading the way were able to establish. Number 1 is, for leaders, is to be able to set the vision, to be able to inspire individuals who work with them, who work for them, and give that North Star to their teams that no matter what, when the grounds shift, they still have this mission and vision and the North Star to go after. It is also allowing management layer under them to be self-sufficient and make decisions on the spot and not constantly look for elevation of every topic, right? It's giving that decision-making power. And then it's enablement on the edges. It's people who work in the field who are enabled with the skills they need for tomorrow and instilling the constant learning and ability to gain new skills that will help them within the organization.
And Dean James, I'm really curious as to what you're seeing, both from the corporate perspective and the university perspective, as you're training this next generation of business leaders and executives.
So I'll tell you a quick story. Several years ago, when I was still teaching in the classroom, I had a student it was a case study classroom, and so I was challenging him on his response and trying to get him to go deeper and deeper. And he just ultimately became so frustrated, he sort of broke down in class. And I went up to him afterwards, I said, what was going on there? And he said, I'm supposed to be a leader, I'm supposed to know all the answers. And I said, actually, you're not. And that's part of the problem, when we assume that because you hold a particular title or a particular position, you are the only person who can fix the problem. And so when you talk about scale, real leadership is about leveraging the other people in the organization. And it's not only about your direct reports. It's not about the 6 or 7 or 8 people that report to you. It's about even deeper in the organization, people who have different experiences with the product or service or with the client, getting their ideas, getting their input, and elevating all of the content that exists within your organization so that you have so much more input by which to make a decision, and you're not solely relying on the quite limited information that you as a particular leader will have.
That's such a good point because, as journalists, we're fortunate enough to get to interview key business leaders pretty frequently, like we're doing right now. And one of the key traits that I noticed that in business leaders who are much more successful than, the norm is that they're able to engender trust within their organizations and galvanize their workforce to support them and get behind their mission. And that part of that process is consulting with them and leaning on them and enabling their teams to make key decisions.
Yeah. The one thing that I will say about trust is it's sort of like resilience now. It's a really overused word, and we don't really go deep in understanding what trust is. And so what I communicate both in the classroom and when I'm working with leaders is that trust is a multifaceted issue. And when you break it down to trust in one's communication, their ability to articulate and be honest and candid about their ideas, one's ability to be trusted in their what I call contractual trust, which is follow through. They actually will follow through on the things that they're committing to. And then there's competence-based trust. Can I trust the people that I'm working with to be competent in the job that they've been tasked with doing? And once you unpack and look at relationships from a trusting perspective across all 3 of those dimensions, you have much more targeted feedback to understand how to engage and how to lead and connect with an individual.
Maybe building on the point of trust and what Dean James mentioned in terms of not having all the answers, I really agree with that statement that as leaders, we feel pressure of having all the answers. And it actually is not the case. We need to empower the teams. We need to set the vision and the guidance. And it actually it's uncomfortable to be in the leadership position when you may not have all the answers. So it's actually a very humbling experience that starts getting into a human-centric leadership style as opposed to business-centric. And so the leaders of tomorrow are really focused on people and talent and human side of their role rather than the task at hand. And we see it with organizations that succeed.
So we've been talking now about key leadership attributes and, individual attributes too, in order to remain resilient in an ever-changing workplace. I do want to address some leadership gaps as AI adoption accelerates, where you both are seeing the biggest leadership gaps emerging and how companies can prepare leaders who are both technologically fluent and deeply human in their approach.
I think one of the leadership gaps is we assume that we will have what's necessary to be as agile and as flexible and as adaptable as is necessary. And the reality is it's really, really hard to keep up with the pace of change. And so building the support mechanisms, investing in yourself, leaning into your own strengths are the kinds of behaviors that we see the most successful leaders doing. It's not just textbook, what am I supposed to know, but it's how do I leverage information, ideas, and people to help fill the gap of what I know and what I need to know.
Catherine?
Yes, specifically on the topic of AI, and you probably see I like data. So I was looking into some of the recent stats. Here's a highlight of the day. 90% of the organizations are saying that in some shape or form they are embracing AI. They already use the tools. 9 out of 10 people in workforce are suggesting that they're using AI tools in their daily lives, which is amazing. Just think about progress in the last 24 months, right, with AI adoption. Yet, 95% of AI projects fail, which is twice as much as any other emerging technology.
Why do you think that is?
So it comes down to 2 things, actually, very interestingly. One is skills gap. More than half of those failures are attributed to the fact that there's no skills in the market to actually keep the mission going. So it's purely the skills gap related issue. And the second one is trust. More than half of the employee base is resisting adoption of AI because of the fear for job losses. And so building the trust and the understanding that it's not either or, it's the combination of both and the empowerment that comes with it. That's the task that leaders have on hand to accelerate adoption.
So Catherine, you oversee consulting in AI cloud modernization. How are you coaching clients to bridge this gap between tech adoption and human-centered leadership?
Yes, it's a very balancing act, I would say. It honestly comes down to very few things. Number one is full alignment at the top of the organization as far as what they're trying to accomplish. You cannot have 10 different visions and have your organization and your employees follow the lead. So the full alignment at the top with the vision. Number 2 is investing in people, like I said. If our biggest problem is developing the skills for tomorrow and the skills gap of today, investing in people is only going to help you. And then last but not the least, it's also getting to a very clear view of the ROI, right? A lot of organizations love to experiment with new technology. There's always a new shiny object. And unless as an organization you're very disciplined about what's the ROI, why are we doing this, companies tend to either fail or waste resources, and it puts them further away from their ultimate goal of modernizing for the future.
So I'm connecting the dots on what you're all saying, and now I'm starting to wonder, it's a bit of a selfish question, but I'm sure it's relevant to everybody in the audience. So for both of you, if we're potentially going to have 7 careers in our lifetime, maybe not all of us, but we'll have a couple, and we need to continue to adapt, what are going to be the metrics for success for how we're going to be evaluated? I'd love to just get some, predictions from the both of you on that front.
Well, I think to the extent that we continue to live in a capitalist society, we know that there are clear measures of what that looks like, and revenue is always going to be a measure of that, depending on the nature of the organization. The ability to acquire customers to sell your product or service is always going to be a measure of that. The ability for your entity to grow and to evolve in ways that allow for sustainability, that will always be a measure of success. So those are 3 off the bat that I think have been foundational and will continue to be foundational.
And building on that point, so those are the measures of success as a business goes, and how you get to it. What are your leading indicators on that journey? So a lot of companies are now embracing that notion of never-ending learning, right? So are your employees embracing and learning new things? What's your adoption of the new skills within the organization? So I think we'll start seeing some of those leading indicators, but I absolutely agree that the metrics are probably going to continue being the same, and how you differentiate yourself, how you get there, is what will define the winners of the future.
Well, at least something will stay the same, hopefully. So I am somebody that has a hard time adjusting to change, but obviously need to work on that. So final thoughts. We have about 30 seconds left. For both of you, what's one call to action or advice you'd like to leave our audience with as they go back to their organizations and teams?
Yeah. For me, it is to lean into the things that make you distinct. We spend so much of our lives trying to assimilate, trying to fit into the image of what it looks like to be a leader, what it looks like to be a vice president, and at some point you become indistinguishable. But when you feel comfortable enough to lean into the things that actually differentiate you from that grouping, then that's where you start to stand out. So I would say lean into the things that make you distinct.
Catherine?
And I would say, as you stay true to your core, also lead with empathy. Change is hard. People need help. People need that human side of the leadership. And so if there's one thing that I would encourage all of us to keep in mind is the human-centric leadership.
Well, that's a great place to end, human side of leadership. Well, thank you, Dean James and Catherine Malkova.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.